Welcome to Cleveland, the rock and roll capital of the world. Rock and roll heroes of the world are memorialized in the building behind me. But for every band enshrined in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there are thousands who are not.
Well, my world used to be sunny, and jokes used to be funny, but now you're gone, and everything's turned all around, and now it's cold outside.
Rock and roll culture exploded in Cleveland just like any other city in America in the 1950s. The difference between Cleveland and any other city is that Cleveland holds the title, the home of rock and roll. Some Cleveland bands like the Outsiders, the Raspberries, and the James Gang had national hit songs. Other Cleveland bands, such as the Grasshoppers, Michael Stanley Band, Euclid Beach Band, and the Choir had regional hits.
Oh gosh, every Wednesday night we'd play behind Avon Lake High School on the tennis courts. And we'd draw in, anywhere between 600 and 800 kids on a night. That was pretty phenomenal.
If you remember these times, if you have any memories of the old Northeast Ohio haunts like the Chesterland, the Corral, the Jail, Hullabaloos, Euclid Tavern, and the Agora, sit back now and enjoy this look back into the origins of Cleveland rock and roll. In early 1950s Cleveland, TV was still in the future. Locally, radio was king. Disc jockey Alan Freed, a native of Salem, Ohio, had befriended record store owner Leo Mintz of the Prospect Avenue Record Rendezvous. Leo Mintz had gone looking for rhythm and blues records by black musicians to be used during airplay in 1949. Alan Freed was the only DJ in northeastern Ohio who played them on his Akron radio show. Then on July 11th, 1951, calling himself Moondog, Alan Freed began a new show. He went live on the air on Cleveland radio with the Moondog Rock and Roll House Party.
1, 2, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, rock. 5, 6, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, rock. 9, 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, rock. We're gonna rock around the clock tonight.
His show aired live on Friday nights. Alan Freed was playing current rhythm and blues for a mostly white teenage audience, with Leo Mintz handing him records. Alan Freed played rhythm and blues originals like Jackie Branson's Rocket 88, which had been recorded by Ike Turner's Clarksdale, Mississippi Kings of Rhythm. Freed played these songs to an audience of white kids, while also playing the Bill Haley and the Saddlemen version.
You women have heard of jalopies, you heard the noise they make, let me introduce you to my rocket 88. Yes, it's great, just one way. Everybody likes my rocket 88. Keep on churning.
Alan Freed and Leo Mintz named the new sound rock and roll to avoid any stigma attached to playing what was called at that time race music. Ironically, rock and roll was actually slang for sex in the black community. What do you remember about Alan Freed? Anything?
Well, his radio show, mainly. And my father used to say, why you listen to that?
Yeah, exactly. I used to call my classical music graveyard music.
Yeah, in the 50s, the tenor sax was the quote-unquote hip instrument. And I wanted to be a sax player like, well, Bill Haley in the Comets, Rock Around the Clock. They had a sax player called Rudy, and I wanted to be like him. But my brother, Don, got me on the guitar, and the rest is history.
This new rock and roll sang about cars and city streets and the passions of American teenagers. Guitars and basses were electrified and amped up, not acoustic. Continuing the distorted guitar sound from Rocket 88, caused by rain leaking onto the amplifier when the band drove to the recording studio, the Moondog House Party became a radio hit on Friday nights in Cleveland. In March 1952, tickets were oversold for the first Moondog Coronation Ball. Public safety workers shut down the show as the performers began to play because too many people showed up and crowded the doors. Cleveland was still a segregated city, and the crowd of mixed black and white music lovers shocked mainstream culture. Some feared that rock and roll would upset the neat separation of races, which had been the standard social contact. Because of the Coronation Ball, other cities began banning rock and roll concerts. Rock and roll was providing a different perspective to youth rather than the sanitized mass-market crooners like Pat Boone and Doris Day. Music quickly increased the exposure between the variety of ethnic groups in Cleveland. Rock and roll was challenging existing norms of values and public taste. Parents and community leaders were scandalized by the so-called lewd movements and pelvic gyrations exhibited by these new rock and rollers. What's often forgotten as we look back is that while the blues and even rhythm and blues had been played in the USA before, it had never been the sort of music a huge mass white youth market demanded.
You know, gang, you all remember Maybelline, about the young man with the guitar who couldn't catch her with his car? Well, here he is to tell us all about it with a brand new automobile, Chuck Berry, and his fantastic beat.
Baby, you can't catch me. 'Cause if you get too close, you know I'm gone like a fool. Breathe.
The fallout from the first Moondog Coronation Ball spread in news reports nationwide and even around the world as the Moondog Party continued to rock on the radio in Cleveland on Friday nights. Screaming headlines warning of the dangers of rock and roll only prompted curious music lovers all over the world to tune in their radio dials.
Jim and I used to go up and listen to the Circle Ballroom, and up there they had, on Friday nights, they'd have a lot of country western bands. And this one particular night we were there, Bill Randall of WRE came out, and I'm like, God, what's Bill Randall doing here? The show was actually run by Tommy Edwards, but Bill Randall introduced this funny-looking teenage guy, and he had blonde hair and long sideburns, and he stood up in front of everybody and instead of playing the regular country western music, he started doing some kind of weird music. The name was Strange, and Jim Keneally turned to me and says, "Who is this jerk?" I said, "I don't know, but he's pretty weird." He was shaking all over the place like as if, like I said, he was on drugs or something. Well, later on we found out that it was Elvis Presley himself. And it was his one and only visit as a newcomer to the world of rock and roll. And he was in reality a nobody. Apparently he went over to a high school, I guess that day, or he was at a high school that day, and they introduced him too. So it was Bill Randall was trying to promote him.
In 1954, Alan Freed left Cleveland for WINS Radio in New York City and a new TV show featuring rock and roll. Rock and roll went Hollywood between 1954 and 1957 with movies like Blackboard Jungle and Jailhouse Rock, featuring new breakout artists Bill Haley and the Comets and Elvis Presley.
Jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard this knocked out jailbird sing that rock.
With the absence of Alan Freed, DJ Bill Randall of WRE became the new Cleveland rock and roll radio king. Fans called him the Pied Piper of Cleveland. Fats Domino credits his popularity to Bill Randall. Randall interviewed rock and roll artists on the air and featured guest stars of the day, like a TV host over the radio. He was the first DJ to play Elvis Presley north of the Mason-Dixon line. In fact, Elvis Presley performed at Cleveland's Circle Theater February of 1955 and at Brooklyn High School in Cleveland on October of 1955. Cleveland's Tommy Edwards from Cleveland radio station WERE ran the show at the Circle Theater and introduced Elvis. Later, he'd run his own record store called Tommy Edwards Record Haven. The rock and roll format was hastily picked up and imitated by DJs on the radio throughout the U.S. and even across borders and oceans. Rock and roll performers were riding the wave that wouldn't curl until 1963, when the first British invasion would arrive. These British invaders would worship African American music, specifically the purest roots of blues, and continue to change the musical paradigm for America's transistorized kids. By 1963, the music industry was getting stagnant.
Local group The Ponytails sang that they were born too late. Cleveland singers like Andrea Carroll reminded listeners, please don't talk to the lifeguard.
Please don't talk to the lifeguard. Please don't talk to the lifeguard.
Record sales had risen less than 2%. Teen idols and folk music dominated the charts. The earliest baby boomers had grown used to the early rock and roll sound, which had assumed a manufactured quality as record companies and disc jockeys churned out predictable hits.
A kid that you won't date. Why was I born too late?
I spelled him.
Great Britain's teenage generation were studying their American cousins while copying fading American musicians like Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, and Bo Diddley. Wartime baby Brits were the first generation to really notice American music or teen culture, currently escaping American teen radar. By now, white American teens were bombarded by teen idol movies and Dick Clark's American Bandstand. Once again, innovative artists of color had been crowded to the edge and were getting little airplay. Being farther away from the source, British teens had a wider perspective. The result was the new British bands heard and began practicing American blues as well as rhythm and blues. Their interpretations of these songs would introduce America to music that was already American, but that had not yet been widely heard. British invasion artists such as the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Who, the Yardbirds, and the Animals idolized American black music. Their earlier releases were note-for-note cover versions of African American original songs, making no attempt to sound white or homogenize the sound. It was not unusual for British bands to demand to tour America with black artists they idolized, and this pairing helped introduce teenagers to the original American versions behind the new British invasion pop. The Rolling Stones took their name from a Muddy Waters song. One of their first covers to chart was a version of Clevelander Bobby Womack's It's All Over Now. British invasion rock and roll from Kinks to Herman's Hermits, and the Dave Clark Five burst with vitality. It only added to the impact of their hair, clothing, and charming English accent had on American girls.